Hello, viewership, listenership, whatever kind of ship you are. This is Free Music Empire. I am Dan O, the king of soy sauce, really. That's my claim to fame. Let me eat. What is it? So, and I am lucky yet again, lucky to have stumbled into an incredible guest. Um, we're talking about someone who wins chicken games he plays against speeding trains. You know what I'm talking about? It's Defcee. um,
Wow. Wow. Yo, that took me back. That took me back. Where did you find that? Because I took that joint off Bandcamp.
it's still on the compilation. There's a compilation from the label from
Oh,
2011. Angel Davenport is
yeah.
on it. Uh,
Yeah.
Wally's on it. A bunch of yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll send you that album too. The reason why I took it down is because I made it when I was 17. And so the raps, and it was very much emblematic of that era of underground hip hop.
Right.
And so there were a lot of like pop culture references and just
Mhm.
things that I said on there that weren't like, I wasn't using homophobic or sexist language, but it was
Mhm.
definitely stuff that was like, I'm not proud that I turned this particular thing into a punchline because it's kind of, so I'll send it to you though.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
I would love to hear what you think about it.
I'll take it. I'm taking Gator and anything, man. I was, it just, I'm very lucky to have you here because you're at this incredible point in your career. Like this
Mm.
is, uh, it's a movie, as Khaled would say. Like this is you've been you took years off, you came
Mm,
back,
mm,
uh, you know, you had an incredible 2020,
mm.
uh, and and now it's just been announced, call out culture, Billy Woods, that you're dropping your Messiah music stuff on Backwoods,
Mhm.
uh, which is like the place now. Like
Yeah.
this is a situation where Backwoods has done it so well that people just buy whatever Backwoods puts out.
Mm.
They just trust Woods, right?
Yeah.
So you're gonna have new people to your music that are gonna come in and they're gonna do what I've done. They're gonna love it and then act like they've always been Def C fans, right?
Thank you, man. I
That's
appreciate that.
um, I was interviewing Blood Money Perez for this FME Attention Undivided, which is what we're doing right now, and
Word. Shout out Blood Money. That's the
and
man.
we were talking about how incredible your guest verses were in 2020,
Mm.
right? Iceberg Theory, I think there was a bunch, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I said to him, I started to get this Cool G rap feeling. Like
Oh, wow.
now, obviously your content's different than Cool G rap,
Yeah.
you know, uh, but like there was a sense that Cool G rap never took a song off, right?
Mm.
So if he was on a posse track, I was always like, yeah, your verse was good, but G rap's coming. G rap, you better finish this. Good. G rap's coming, you know? And
Yeah.
that was how I felt about you in 2020. You were
Wow.
eating up songs. Like it was
Wow.
so
Thank you, man. That's high praise because two of my favorite guest verses of all time are G Rap on Stick to Your Guns and G Rap on The Realist.
oh
Those are like two of, I love those joints so much. And then it's from the Giancana Story album, which
mhm.
oddly enough, I actually live in the same town where Sam Giancana did.
Whoa,
When he
that's
was,
awesome.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I
Yep.
don't know about awesome. I
Well,
grew up in
that's fair.
so I grew up in no, I feel you though. So I grew up in River Forest, Illinois, which is the suburb right next door to the one I live in now. And River Forest was where a whole bunch of, and my wife can hear me in the other room, and she's
Mhm.
like, "Yep, here goes Adam with the tangents again." But my where I grew up, a lot of the mob guys, when they started settling in the suburbs, they settled in that particular suburb and or this one here. So anyway, G Rap, the joint, the second verse on that song, "My Life." which I love that song. That's like one of my favorite verses ever. That's like a perfectly written, that's perfect.
It is.
I wouldn't change a word of it.
No,
So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
He is number 17 all time on my list of favorite MCs.
Word.
Which is always changing, by the way. If your greatest MCs of all time list doesn't change, it sucks. That's what it sucks. Mine's a Google Doc and it's moving. It's always changing. So, but yeah, so it was fascinating diving into your stuff because I got this kind of lived in anxiety of like, oh shit, I've been on this journey, like obviously the C-listers version, right, of this journey, because like I know the poetry scene pretty well, like, and by the way, shout out to people from Chicago. I was teasing people from Chicago over the weekend that they never stop talking about Chicago. They're from Chicago and about other things that are from Chicago. So I was friends with a lot of interesting, cool poets from Chicago. I used to help run, not in any important capacity, but I was like the backup chemistry glue guy. I was the Shaquem Noah of this poetry organization. And in Portland, Maine. And we had some Chicago.
So that was so like just, and I apologize for cutting you off, but like, so I know my point of reference for New England spoken word anything, my first point of reference was Jared Paul.
Oh yeah.
And this is a hip hop thing, but like Sage Francis.
Yeah.
Because I know he did some spoken word poetry stuff as well.
Yep. No, he was clicked up with Buddy Wakefield, who's an incredible poet. And there's another guy who was an incredible poet too. I can't remember his name. Maybe it was Jared Paul. Because it was, and so he's big into that. And so I like Chicago people would come through. Billy Tuggle. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Billy Tuggle's the man.
No, he's awesome. Incredible.
Yeah, he's good people.
Will Gibson, like I was Will Gibson for a while. So like, and they were just constantly talking about Chicago and like, oh, you like this blues guy? Chicago. Oh, you like this fighter? Chicago. And so they knew everyone who was from Chicago. And it became like this weird Edgar Allan Poe story where I couldn't get away from Chicago. And that was the time when Chicago was coming up also with Fake Shore Drive. And I was following Fake Shore Drive. And I was following it all this stuff. I'm like, another Chicago guy. And it became interesting. So it's a weird place, and I was listening to 2015. I'm sorry, I forgot the album name, but it's like
the Damn Near Grown.
Damn Near Grown. Yeah. That is a heck of an album.
Thank you.
And there's an interesting like narrative point where you're talking about like this is I'm not from here, right? Like the drugs and the guns here, but this is my home, right? And I was like, wow. When is that moment where you were like, this is my shit?
So I got my start performing at a venue called Urban Sandbox, or a venue called the Ice Factory that hosted once a month an open mic night called Urban Sandbox. And that was kind of where the performance bug bit me. So like I used to go to that joint once a month. It was co-hosted by Dan Sullivan, D Sully, who went to my high school. So he came out of the same spoken word poetry program that was there. So we have just as additional context. I went to Oak Park River Forest High School. So who most famous alumni is Ernest Hemingway. But we've got it's like everybody from Iman Shumpert to Kathy Griffin has graduated from there. And they had my freshman year, a full-time spoken word poetry program that was taught by my mentor, where his sole job was to just push into English classes for a week at a time and teach poetry and
Wow.
teach spoken word poetry. And then there was a spoken word poetry club that was after school that had like between 70 and 80 kids in it at any time. We did 3 showcases a year. We participated in Louder Than a Bomb, the Youth Poetry Slam in Chicago.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that was kind of my entree into the open mic world and the spoken word scene. And for as much as I love poetry, it was really hip hop that I was there for. Like poetry was a way for me to rhyme in a way that was kind of like contextually understood in school or in different public places. Because at that point, you know, the suburbs hadn't really fully embraced hip hop yet. The kids in the suburbs had.
Right.
But, you know, like, it wasn't like people were running after school hip hop workshops at those
Right.
schools.
Right.
So
Right.
what I had to do was I would take the Green Line to Urban Sandbox on, you know, the 3rd Thursday of every month to perform. And then every Saturday I would take the Green Line to the Blue Line to go to YCA workshops in Wicker Park. So, you know, that was kind of one of the cool things about Chicago's spoken word scene is there really is, and maybe not as much as there used to be, but there really was a very close connection between the hip hop scene and the spoken word scene.
Yep.
So like Lamont Manuel and all of the dudes from Tomorrow Kings I met doing open mics or spoken word poetry stuff. And you know, I'm not from Chicago. I'm a white kid from the suburbs who grew up in a very kind of privileged environment that allowed for me to basically enter into it without having to navigate a lot of the shit that if you're Black and brown in Chicago, you're forced to navigate or you're forced to have to contend with. So I'm really big on like, I always wanted to advocate for Chicago hip hop and Chicago hip hop artists because, you know, really nobody else is going to do it. I think that's a major reason why so many people from Chicago put on for Chicago is because no one else is going to do it. No one else is going to tell that story. We have major media outlets here, but it's not the home base, you know, like LA, Atlanta has like Turner and CNN, New York, you know, London even, right? So these are all places with thriving hip hop or hip hop influenced scenes, but they also have major media outlets there. So like, if you think about it, there are stories of different hip hop communities, even in places like Oakland and Houston, where that story is well articulated, but it hasn't been when you think about Chicago's history. So, you know, you can think about DJ Screw and the Screw tapes. You can think about Too Short selling tapes out of his trunk, but there really isn't a story. There are stories of individual Chicago hip hop artists, but the actual Chicago hip hop scene and story as a narrative hasn't really been told. And so, you know, it's a situation where a lot of people think it's like, well, Chicago has a, you know, a younger sibling complex or whatever, when really it's just, you know, nobody has ever really captured the scene accurately before. And so a lot of people here are, you know, proud of it. And I think my way of giving back to that scene and paying it forward is to just kind of put on for a lot of the younger hip hop artists here. And that's my way of contributing to the Chicago hip hop community, is to just use my platform to amplify those voices. And I think that's why, you know, when I was 14 or 15 and I was first performing at those open mics, that's why I felt like it was home, because I didn't have that where I grew up. And, you know, I know that this is kind of the notorious thing about Chicago, and I don't know how well people know it, but, you know, it's segregated by design. So there are people who live on the South Side in an entirely self-contained white communities in the midst of, you know, some of the richest culture the world has ever seen, who would never in their lives try to communicate with Black or brown people.
Right.
So, you know, where I grew up in River Forest, I grew up loving hip hop, but there was nobody who was really interested in it. So I didn't really have anybody to connect with until I started going into the Chicago spoken word and hip hop scene. And then I started meeting the people that I loved. So I think a lot of all of that kind of goes into where that line came from. And then also the other thing that's in that couplet that you mentioned is, at the end of the day, when people talk about violence in Chicago, you're not considering the institutional failures that lead to that violence. And you're also not considering the fact that, like, you know, the things that are here are not here by mistake. And they're often not things that are generated in Chicago. You know, like, if you want to talk about gun violence, it's hard to get a gun in the city, but it's easy to do that in the suburbs. And there are plenty of gun shops in the suburbs that have no issue with selling, you know, handguns in bulk to, you know, teenagers. And it's the same thing with, you know, the drugs.
Right.
And if you think about, you know, the dope game in Chicago didn't start with the gangs that came out of, you know, like the gangster disciples and the vice lords and all that. It started when the mob brought it in. It started with bootlegging. Like, so there are all of these different assumptions that people make about Chicago, specifically about Black and brown people in Chicago, that are really unfair because A, you're not looking at the institutional roots of the things that you're talking about. B, a lot of times you're just using Chicago as a straw man argument because you're losing an argument with somebody about institutional racism and its impact. And C, you don't actually care about people in Chicago. So if you want to, you know, talk all this shit about the city, let me remind you really quickly of a few things. One being, it's an amazing city and I'm not even from there. Two being, I'm incredibly lucky that I was accepted there, even though I'm not from there. So I'm going to be very gracious whenever I talk about it. And three, all of the issues that you're talking about, like they're endemic to Chicago, are actually things that are a result of, you know, centuries of outside bullshit being brought in. So, yeah, I apologize because I went on a bunch of different tangents.
No, that's okay. I mean, it's Chicago gets manipulated. Like that same phone call I said that was like, you know, 40 minutes ago with a best friend of mine. We started talking about Chief Keef. We started talking about, like, he's like, man, that album, that major label album kind of sucked. And I said, but after he got out of the spotlight, his shit is amazing. He was a kid when he moved. And now he's fucking awesome. And nobody cares because Pitchfork Gun Range interview, they're good. You know, like, you know, they got what they wanted out of him and they threw him away.
And then he got locked up behind that too, because he violated, they violated his probation. And so I actually worked in a juvenile detention center where he got locked up. So I was working there while he was locked up there. And you know, they had him, at that point, he was too big to be with the rest of the young people. So they kind of had him on his own ward. But yeah, like, that kind of stuff happens all the time with the drill rappers, and it's just so, it's disappointing. I'm happy to hear somebody who's as well informed in hip hop as you are bigging up Keef, because I think a lot of people treat him like what you're saying, as if it's disposable. You know?
And I knew, like, there's been times in my career where I had to grow from that shit. I wrote the like gross chance review of that first mixtape 10 Day, where I was like, if you want a break from the drill scene and the Chief, and it wasn't like but a few weeks before I felt really bad about it. Before I was like, oh shit, like this is what's supposed to happen, right? They want to put him over here against him over here, and really there was like King Louis, Sasha Go Hard. There were so many people that were doing so many interesting things. And they just kind of got swept away when the wave crested. Like, it's wild.
Yeah. Katie got bands too. Katie got bands, fire. King Louis, fire.
I mean, I will go to my grave saying King Louis was the best of them. I will, that's
Yeah.
That he was just that he was. It seemed like he wasn't even trying. He was just so melodic,
Yeah.
uh, and so gifted at what he was doing. Um, but yeah, no, it was an incredible time. But
Mhm.
I don't know, man. I feel like a scene has to have people within it that care enough to control and reset the narrative. Uh, I feel like the Bay might have that, right? Where the Bay, like, they're always the Bay, and sometimes they blow up and it becomes a trend, but the Bay kind of takes care of itself in that sense.
Yeah.
I don't love the Chicago media the same way. Um,
Nah, they don't, and they don't rock with. I mean, a lot of Chicago media too. It's like if they can't find an easy way to categorize what it is you do, they can't. You know, if they can't turn it into an easy dichotomy, then they don't really rock with it. So that's
yeah,
why it was so interesting to kind of see when Chance and Keith kind of popped off around the same time,
yep,
kind of see that there was that distinct division that was presented by the media.
yep,
Because I was kind of running around some of the same open mics. So Chance and Vic
yep,
Mensa and Mick Jenkins and No Name, and they're all rocking with Keith.
yep.
So it's the same. It's kind of the it was just it's always kind of interesting to see, and you know there's precedent for that in terms of the mainstream versus underground argument that
Right,
started when Funk Crusher Plus blew up.
right.
Um, but yeah, I mean that's something that's always kind of been here. Is then it was like a tale of two cities. When in reality, the thing about Chicago hip hop that's so dope is any style of hip hop you want, it's made here and it's made extremely well. Like not
That's fair.
like not and there are people who you know either are forgotten about by the industry or there are people who are just super dope but they don't necessarily have the same resources that they would in a major city like LA or New York. So a lot of I mean the only major rapper to come out of Chicago to really stay home was Twista.
Yep.
uh, everybody else kind of went to New York or LA or Atlanta. And yeah, man, I mean, that's why we got to put on because it's
Right.
like who else but us? And I think it's been really cool to see people like yourself. And if there's been any fringe benefit of whatever kind of moderate success
Yep.
I've had in the past couple of years, if that means that people have been put on to really dope rappers from Chicago and
Yeah.
they have a richer understanding of the city's music, then I feel like I've done something right.
And big up to one of your guests on Scenic Deluxe Edition, Ad 2.
Yes, sir.
Ad 2 used to write for Hip Hop DX
Yep.
1,000 years
Remember
ago,
that. Yeah.
back when writers would do that. I don't
Yeah.
know who would want to do that at this point, but uh, and I remember reading Ad 2 like way back in the day when I was like, before I'd even thought about blogging. And I remember thinking, I don't want to do this. Like, he's really good at this, but it must
Yeah.
be so hard to try and achieve as a rap artist and to write critically about rap.
Mhm.
The first thing they're going to say is, you're just mad because you're not as popular as X rapper. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so, but yeah, he was smart and he's a great, his writing was great. I really enjoyed his perspective. But I think that's it. It's like getting like the call out cultures and the dad bod rap pod and these like Stony Island audio, getting people to tell their stories
Mhm.
from inside, understanding the different perspectives, fan perspective, journalist perspective, you know, artist perspective on these things is good. It's good to be able to get people dimensions at it. But yeah, no, there's a flow question. This is because I was interviewing Alex Ludovico, who's from Indiana,
Yeah.
uh,
He's
and
dope. Alex Ludovico is nice.
super nice. I really enjoy his stuff.
Yeah.
And we were talking. I said, "Look, I've got this theory that if you're from the Midwest, there are no flow presets. You can kind of do whatever you want. Right? In New York, there's like this heavy set of expectations, right?
Right.
And it say honestly, same thing on the West, right?
Mhm.
You know, but it, obviously Texas is Texas, they're gonna do what they do. But like you can do whatever you want in the Midwest, and they're like we talked about people didn't even know Bone Thugs were from the Midwest. They were just like, those guys are from the West Coast. You can just do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that in Chicago as part of what you're talking about with the many styles?
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of characterized. I remember growing up, and Chicago hip hop was kind of characterized pre Kanye, and then everybody kind of thought Common was from New York, unless you were from here.
Right.
But we were characterized by like the psychodramas and the twisters and the crucial conflicts and the Bone Thugs as well. So it was always kind of like, well, if you're from Chicago, you got to rap fast. And the reality is, because of where we are, Chicago's a hub for transportation and goods, and it's been that way for hundreds of years now. And that's kind of what the music was like too, because we would hear, maybe a couple of local artists in regular rotation, but there would be the people that you could hear any radio station anywhere. Right. But the major radio, like I remember I was born in '89. So what I was hearing when I was growing up, when I started getting into hip hop in like the early 2000s, and DJ Ferris on Power 92 had this mix show, and I was hearing AZ, I was hearing Scarface, I was hearing Jay-Z, I was hearing Nas, I was hearing Wu-Tang, I was hearing some of the stuff Twista was doing. I was hearing, because he was in the Heavy Hitters Network. And so a lot of times too, the music that you hear on the radio in Chicago tends to be the stuff that the majors are testing out, because whatever we respond to tends to be the stuff that gets a good response pretty much anywhere. Detroit's the same way. So, I think that's part of it too, is that there's just kind of a confluence of a bunch of influences here. And, there's so many rappers, like Cameron and DMX, rest in peace, were living here at one point on the West Side. You had Cormega has a huge fan base in Chicago. Mobb Deep has a huge fan base in Chicago. There are people from the South who come up here who get a whole lot of love. Like there's so many people from so many different places that Chicago really put on for. And I think that in addition to the fact that our underground scene was so strong and had, again, this is something that not enough people talk about, but had a lot of national influence. So I'm thinking of the Galapagos Four, Typical Cats. I'm thinking of Moment and Vakil and, all of the people who came out of those camps, and the Rhyme Fests and the Juices and the Ange 13s and the Decays, all of the people who kind of came out of that scene as well. You have to be nice to come out of here. Like you have to be good at what you do, because you're competing with everybody else here for what were at a certain point a limited number of spots in terms of attention. So that meant that you had to do everything well. You had to know how to make the club record. You also needed to know how to do like the crazy 32 bar verse joint. So somebody like Twista, when he made that Kamikaze album, Kamikaze's kind of like the perfect example of like, you have somebody from Chicago who's doing all of these different styles and rapping really well in every verse. So, I mean, that's kind of the flow preset. We had a stereotype at one point because of what Chicago sounded like when we hit. But now I think it's more so just kind of that kind of diversity in the scene, and the kind of versatility that we had comes from necessity. And I think it's something that in the long run kind of benefits all of us.
And there's so there's so many branches. It just struck out in so many directions, right?
Mhm.
There's people I know who are just like diehard Saba people. Like they're
Yeah.
just like Saba's the man, and you will never convince me otherwise. Um, and I'm so happy for that, right? And there's like, uh, you know, shout out to No Names, probably one of the most hate followed people in social media.
And I don't understand that.
I
I mean, I do from the angle of when you speak truth to power,
right,
especially if you're a Black woman, people
yeah,
always have an issue with that, but she's not wrong.
she's so dope.
She's
She's
coming
so
from an
dope.
important
Yeah.
place. And on top of that, she's out rapping
Oh
damn near
yeah.
everybody in your top
Oh, yeah.
10. So
She's incredible. She's
yeah.
incredible. And like, it's yes. I mean, that is. There's several conversations there about how like when women are confidently affirming things that are not popular, it becomes a problem way more. Like people would much rather hear Bill Maher say the same shit than
Mm,
would hear No Name say the same shit. It's just
mm.
that's just the reality of it. And yeah, she's like overthought about. A lot of times I think she's just doing her work, and a lot of times she's not declaring anything. She's trying to figure it out in real time. Uh,
Mhm.
she's just a very thoughtful person.
Yeah.
So, but that's neither here nor there. So with the flow stuff, I was going to talk to you because I think we're an incredibly interesting time in music, right?
Mhm.
I always think of you as an all-time MC. I feel like you could be dropped into Flavor Unit and turn heads.
Thank
It feels like we have more unconventional flows than ever.
you.
How have you seen cadences change in the last like 5 or 6 years?
That's a great question. This interview is great already. This is the kind of rap stuff I don't get to nerd out about as much. I mean,
Yep.
it's a couple of things. I think one thing is there's more of an emphasis on melody. You have more people who are trying to really find, like I heard this unreleased joint from Maxo and Kendrick Lamar. No, not Maxo, from Baby Keem and Kendrick Lamar, where it really does kind of sound like they're both rapping to find every single pocket they can in the beat.
Yep.
And I think that's really dope. And I think there's historical precedent with it, right? So like Freestyle Fellowship, I think was kind of the groundbreaking moment for a lot of people in terms of cadence.
Yep.
And what you could do with it. So just in being able to kind of also maintain the listener's attention as much as you can too. So I think that's one of the things that I've seen changed as well. And something that's played into my own writing where it's like, if I'm in the same cadence for 16 bars, I better be saying some shit. Because other than that, it's going to get real boring really quickly. And so it's a challenge to me to try to figure out like, okay, cool. How can I find a way to change the pocket every 2 to 4 bars to kind of keep things moving and to keep things bouncing? And I think I've seen that change as well. And then also just everybody's more open-minded. So there isn't as much regionalism as there used to be either. So,
100%.
you know, an ASAP Rocky or an ASAP Ferg, they're not oddities in the same way that they would have been like 15 years ago.
Right.
So, you know, they can, I think that Young Pretty Flacco Jordy 2 joint that ASAP Rocky did is one of my favorite, just because of the pockets he picks and it's so fluid and he's going in, and it's the same thing with, there's a joint on the ASAP Mob tape where Ferg does something crazy. So I think it's just more so like people are trying to find ways to top each other, and musicality comes into that. And people are just in the studio all the time, and practice makes perfect. So, you know, I think that's definitely how I've seen it change too. And then when you're able to hear somebody like a Freddie Gibbs rhyming on stuff that you wouldn't traditionally think of as something where you could hit those different flows, like on Madlib or Alchemist joints, I think that also is kind of like you know, I think every generation in hip hop either grants permission
Right.
or needs permission or both. And I think what we're seeing in real time that's really dope is in terms of the cadences and the flows, and somebody like Young Thug is
Right.
amazing. But you're seeing that happen in real time where people are just constantly trying to evolve and move into the next, whatever's the next shit. And so that just is going to continue to breed more creativity and more innovation. So I think that's it too. I think like with technology, the styles upgrade, you know, at a quicker and quicker clip, which is
that's true.
dope, you know?
You don't need the studio. You don't need like the control, right? The industry control of like we're focusing on that person. The rest of them are gone. Everybody's kind of running their race. And it's funny because I've heard a bunch of people say in regards to flow, it's like jazz now, right? Everybody's in their pockets. And the metaphor is interesting to me, right? So if you think of it like jazz, then you think of AC Alone and Mike and Nine as Charlie Parker and Dizzy on the stage, like more notes in than you ever thought were there, right? Like the crowd is like, what is this? You know, I'm used to swing. And so we go from there, and now we're in like Young Thug, Akai Solo, we're just all over the place, right? And this is like acid jazz. This is like Afu Ra to Weather Report, you know?
You mean Sun Ra?
Sun Ra. Jeez. I love Afu Ra too. I was just say, love both of the Ra.
Right.
But yes, Sun Ra. So, yeah. So I think that's kind of, we're at the acid jazz stage where people are like, it doesn't have to hold together beautifully. I get to expand wherever I want. And it's great, but I find that because I have old ears, I have to condition myself to an artist. I have to figure out them. You know what I mean? And it can take a while.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, but because you're in a different place where I feel like people get you better when they hear you because it's a straightforward, it's a kind of a kinetic thing. But it puts you in a weird space, right? The people who know you are quite passionate about how good you are. The people who don't know you. And is that like an odd experience to live through, like from texturally?
It was at one point. So I think in Lamont Manuel and Sketch 185, Gyroscope, Malak L, Wizard Jenkins the Great, Gilead 7, those are my rap big brothers. So a lot of what I know I got from them and got from gems that they gave me or just being around them while they're creating music. But something that Lamont said that was really instructive for me in terms of thinking about that was when people don't know how to categorize you and the expectation is that you have to brand or market yourself in order to obtain a following, it's an incredibly frustrating experience. But I think that just kind of going back to that point about granting permission, I think seeing what Woods did, I think seeing what Ka did was really important for me as somebody with a day job, because then I could say, you know what, like I could just work on my craft. I don't have to worry about, and Damn Near Grown was really me trying to like a center field approach.
Right.
And it's the kind of joint where I've had different people say all of those songs on there have been different people's favorite songs in terms of like from the album. And it was me trying to do as much as I could to reach everybody while also maintaining a coherent sound. And I think what that wound up doing was, while I think that album has aged a lot more gracefully than I thought it would, I also think that people didn't necessarily know what to do with the music apart from the joint with like Benjamin Earl Turner and Joe and
Right.
Ab and No Name. So people would gravitate toward that because they were familiar with the names. And then they would listen to the rest of it and not really understand it, but they'd call it like real hip hop or lyrical or whatever, just because of the textures of some of the beats.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's tough and it's frustrating at first, but then it does allow you to kind of refocus and narrow the focus and just say, you know what, like if these are things that are not going to be easy for people to do, I'm not going to worry about it. And I'm just going to focus on making the best possible music that I can. And that's
Right.
what I'm going to be known for. I'm just going to be known for being a really good rapper who makes really good music. And then I don't got to worry about all of the extra stuff that comes with that.
100%. I mean, one of the things that really immediately made you one of my favorite rappers is that your mixture is always changing, right?
Mhm.
Craft is a really big part of what you do, and it grows and develops. But there's an emotional investment in every album that's different. There's characteristics. These albums have different characteristics, right? Production wise, narratively, they just all the albums feel like different people, right?
Mm.
And they have different personalities. So
Hmm.
to me, Damn Near Grown is the hip hop album. That is you saying,
Wow.
I love you, hip hop, and this is what I'm doing for you, right? You actually say
Mm.
it. There's like hip hop saved my life, so now I'm here to save it, right?
Yeah.
There's a sense that you're like, I've been in the poetry scene, I've been this, I've been that, I've talked about myself and what I'm going through. If I don't do anything else, I'm giving you this super hip hop album, right? That's
Mm.
how Damn Near Grown feels to me. I don't know if that's,
Thank you. Nah, I'll take it. Thank you, man.
but Scenic. What do you see as Scenic's personality?
Mm. I think Scenic is like just the nature of that album is probably just it's Scenic is like that kid in class who never does his homework and just earns an A on every test and
Yep.
and can participate in every discussion because he's just applying what he knows by
Yep.
osmosis because that's how he learns. And
Yeah.
so, you know, he's kind of like he's done the homework thing. And I was kind of that kid for a little while until high school. And then high school was like, nah, you gotta actually study here.
Yeah.
But yeah, just because the way that initially came together was I just kind of hit Nick Arcade and I was like, look, I was gonna drop a project this year that hasn't really happened.
Right.
I'm shifting gears. I didn't want to drop anything in December, but I said, I know Nick is always working and he's always down, and he and I have talked about doing something for a long time. I had
Definitely.
dozens of beats of his on the computer. And I said, yo, like, let's just see if we can, you know, Bandcamp Day in December will be the deadline. Let's see what we can do as far as being able to churn something out by then. So the way that came together was he would just kind of send me beats, and every beat he sent was a hit. Like every beat was, so the 5 beats that you heard, apart from the Time Crisis, which is the bonus joint, which was something I had from him from earlier in the year.
Yep.
The other 5 joints were the 5 joints he sent me in that
Woo.
8-day period between when we decided to start it and when we dropped it. And my process for that was unique in that I'd never done this before, but I kind of just had a whole bunch of bars and couplets that I wrote down on a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the fertile ground that the lyrics grew from. So I had all of these different joints just kind of on a piece of paper, and then, you know, I would turn them into songs depending on how the beats I was hearing hit me. So that's how that came together. I've never done anything like it. But yeah, I mean, it was just kind of purely from a place of instinct and, you know, knowledge that I already had.
I mean, I can't imagine getting the Krakoa beat like in your inbox. Being like, oh, this is fucking awesome.
Oh yeah. Yo.
Yeah, just a hell of a thing. I mean,
Oh man.
to me that album feels like I kind of been referring to it in my head as the Craft album. You know,
Word. Yeah.
uh, that's like, a great NBA player hits 28 years old and they just can't be stopped.
Thank you, man. Yeah,
That's
that's kind
just
of
what,
what it felt like.
right? I mean, you're like, they're 28 now. You're like, look, Kobe now knows what you're going to do in this situation, in this situation, in this situation. And so it's over, right? Like, you can see that with the great players. They like snap into that mode where they're like, no, I know what you're going to do if I go to the left. It's fine, right? And that kind of feels like that. I was tweeting about that non sequitur verse, part one, the Wally thing. And I just think I think you could teach that verse for writing classes, right?
Well,
Like it's so important. The close on drying on the radiator is so important to that verse, right? When you start with the clothes drying on the radiators, you feel it. It's visceral, right? It's a detail that sets the stage, and it doesn't set you above the listener. It sets you with the listener. It sets the listener in that room. And then it leads to the stuff about your father, and it just it pays off. It's beautifully done.
Thank you.
But I mean, I just think it's a heck of a thing, and the deluxe edition is so cool because it expands on that and lets you hear all the other stuff. But was it all? It was all done together, and what was the decision to put out the 5 versus the hold the rest, and what was that about?
Well, I mean, Nick, first of all, in addition to being a great producer, is also ill with the design work, and he owns his own clothing store in Tucson, Arizona, and his own brand called Black Broccoli. And I'm rocking the Scenic merch right now. If you haven't already,
I have not.
Shirt, go get you a shirt. $15. $15. You get a free copy of the album. Although you already got
I got a Bill Withers shirt.
Straight. Hey,
Bill Withers shirt.
Bill Withers. All right, cool. I'll take it. I'll take a Bill Withers shirt over a Scenic shirt.
But I'll go. It's just me. It's with sizes. I wear my shirts enormous, so I have a size.
I mean, we got it, and because he presses them up himself, so we kind of sat down and we were like, okay, cool. This is what we thought of doing over the course of 8 days. So we gotta kind of go back to the well and expand it and figure out ways that we can maximize this moment. And that's awesome. And so he sent me beats. I did what I did to him. I tried my best to connect it back to the original material when I could. And I think it just was, it was dope that we were able to put together what we put together in that first week, but we also kind of felt that the music merited revisiting and an extension. And then there were people who were fans of it that we wanted to put on. So Add To really put on for that album or for the EP, which I really appreciated. Rich Jones has been a really good friend of mine for a long time and has always kind of looked out for me and has put me on projects of his. And I wanted to give him an opportunity to really show people that he could rap, because he can, because I think a lot of people just kind of know Rich for a lot of the more melodic stuff he does, but people should know that he really knows how to rhyme. And when he sent me,
floats between genres. He can float between genres. And do like 3 of your favorite genres really well.
Yeah, agreed. So it was really cool to give him that look, and then to just be able to kind of fully celebrate what we'd initially created. And the feedback that we've gotten from it has been really cool, because it clearly, like, that was the right decision. I think sometimes you get luxe editions of projects and it's like, yo, this is an extra 12 songs that, maybe 3
the first time.
Yeah, right. Or maybe 3 of them could have been enough.
Right.
People are trying to drive the streaming numbers up or whatever.
Yeah.
When you talk about a lot of the majors doing that. But for me, it was more so like, okay, this kind of reminds me of back in the day when people would put out the EPs and then would turn the EPs into full-length albums.
Yep.
So to be able to do that was kind of like a bucket list thing where it's like, Funk Crusher Plus is an example of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to be able to do something like that, for it to work, for it to pick up new fans and also make the fans of the first EP feel rewarded was super dope.
That's awesome that you did it that way. I did not expect that was the case. That is an incredibly strange experience for a person like it just, you gave me flashbacks to my first book of short stories called The Miserable Jerk Collection. My wife edited it, and I decided, I was like, I got this vault full of stories. Like I've just been writing in obscurity, right? Just chilling. And I want to put some of these out, but I don't want it to be a greatest hits before I've ever, come out. So I decided I'll put one old one in and I've got to write one new one to match it. It's got to be half and half, right? So with the old ones, she'd edit it and she'd be like, the ending sucks. And I'd be like, what? This is a Dan classic, And then I'd reread it and be like, yeah, she's right. And I'd rewrite it, the ending. You'd have to go into the story, like get in the mode of the story. If successfully rewrite it, and I'd be like, holy shit, this thing's better now. Like, it's a weird experience, right?
Yeah.
So Scenic that I bought originally is a different listening experience than Scenic Deluxe Edition, right? Because it's been touched up. It is, it's refined. So that's a really cool thing, and it must have been a trip while going through and kind of editing it to hear how it had changed.
I mean, for the important thing for me for this one was to just kind of give Nick a lot more creative control. And so what I did was I told him I recorded all the joints here in my apartment. And then when they were all mixed and mastered, I sent them over to Nick and I said, you sequence it. I was like, this is like, last time I put those 5 together and you pretty much just roll with it. So this time, why don't you sequence it? And I think the way he sequenced it is perfect because you kind of like you swim into the deep end and then you wade back to safety by the end of it. So yeah, I think I was very lucky that it worked out that way. And I think was also a very easy way for me to do what you're talking about, which is instead of trying to overcomplicate or be too precious with it, let me pass it off to somebody else and then see what their perspective can bring to the table. And I think the sequence Nick came up with is perfect. I wouldn't have changed a thing.
No, and that's big. There's a lot of great artists in Maine, but there isn't a lot of great producers, right? There's people who can give you music, right? But like sit in the studio with you and mentor you, right? Give you like advice, interact with you like that. So there's just like, there's a lot of artists with no structure around it. And it's a bummer. So it's great to have that trust and be able to kind of, trust each other and move back and forth and create something new out of it.
Yep. And shouts out to wives who give constructive criticism to their husbands. My wife definitely has helped me turn things that were like a B- into an A- or an A. And there was even Damn Near Grown. It was November of 2015. And I was going to abandon it entirely and just kind of quit rapping. I was like, you know what? Like, I have this music. It's dope. I don't know if I like it because I've been sitting with it for like a few years, some of it, And I was like, eh. And then I was listening to it on the car ride up to University of Wisconsin where I had a show.
Yep.
And she was driving us up. And she heard it and she was like, nah, this is pretty good. You got to put this out. And her input has been really helpful in terms of kind of shaping my music and challenging me to think about things in different ways. And I think a lot of times, you know, I can get defensive about certain things and I can get too precious with the music. And it's always good to have that person who's going to be there to kind of check you and be like, maybe not.
It's,
you know,
it's wild. You have to have a healthy outlook on this kind of thing. But like, to me, all smart criticism is important.
Yeah.
Right. It kind of like, if you are waiting for, like, I knew artists who would just like wait until they could interact with important artists and ask them how it was, you know, and you'd be like, yeah, that's an important artist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're great at editing your stuff. You know what I mean? Or that they're invested in editing your stuff. You know, like anybody who has smart criticism, you need to pay attention to it. Some criticism isn't smart because it doesn't realize that the reason you don't like it is what I was trying to do in the first place. Or that they'll be like, you know, that movie was too scary. It's a horror movie. What do you mean?
Yeah.
So you got to kind of look, you know, see if it was successful in doing what it was supposed to do. But important question here. You have an album coming with August Fanon.
An EP. With August, yeah.
So I feel like everyone who does a project with Fanon looks back on that as like a career-changing thing or their best work. What is it about Fanon that does that? What do his beats do? What do they bring out of you?
So, I mean, first of all, before I get into that, I gotta say that like Fanon and Messiah Music, both of whom I'm very fortunate to work with, are really, and people like Nicholas Craven as well, really kind of feel like they're at the forefront of this new era of like underground hip hop production. So I'm thinking Derringer, I'm thinking of J.R. Swifts, people who kind of like are really Kenny Segal or Kenny Siegel.
Siegel.
People who are really kind of holding it down in independent hip hop right now and really kind of defining what it sounds like. So
totally true.
One of the cool things about Fanon is, like you said, a lot of the work that he produces tends to be the best, like some of the best work that artist comes up with. So people like, you know, the first time I heard Makami was HBO, right? Like as far as a full length project, and Fanon's production anchors it. And then my favorite Makami projects, or my favorite Makami project is The Gap.
Right.
And I think all but one of those is Fanon as well. And I think part of what his beats do, when I sat down and got the packs from him, Fanon will send you 40 beats. Fanon sent me literally 40 beats. And I had to go through and be really intentional with what I picked and why. And because he also gives you so many different flavors and different tempos. He's such a he's so good. He has an incredible ear. So like his ear for samples, his ear for breaks, it's impeccable. And he can give you whatever you're looking for. So when I sat down to pick the beats for this, I initially narrowed it down to 6 from 40. And then I kind of kept it to 5. And they were all kind of like varying tempos, but aesthetically fit together. And then there was a 6th, he sent me one last joint, because we initially were going to drop this EP in December of last year. And then we wanted to kind of take our time, maybe building up toward it. And he sent me another pack of 20. And I picked one from it. That was just kind of the one that, and of course there were 19 other crazy ass beats in that pack, but that was the one that fit it. And I think one of the things that it does is the beats are so good that you have that thought that I think all artists have when you get that spark of inspiration, which is I can only fuck this up. Like I can't, like I can't
elevate it. Yeah.
Yeah, like I can't. So then you get intimidated by it, which then forces you to really
push harder.
Yeah, push harder. Like do one of two things. So it'll either force you to just kind of go with your gut. If the music is dope enough, the lyrics will pour out of you, or it will intimidate you so that you know that you have to go through as many rough drafts as it's going to take and listen to whatever music you need to listen to get you in that mode in order to write it. And so this EP is probably my best body of work. And, we're going to be announcing it probably in the next few weeks. So I don't want to give away too much too soon, because there are also going to be some interesting things we're doing with some of the packaging as well, and some of the physicals. So I don't want to give away the title or the concept yet, but I can tell you that, even as a 6-song EP, it's still probably my best body of work. And I'm really, really fortunate that Fanon was willing to give me production that, frankly, he could have given to any number of brilliant artists who he works with on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So,
and I think if you talk to Sleep Sinatra, he would tell you that his career has been different since Routes. Like, right? That was just a big difference. Like, it was a level up, for him, where he was able to be like, wow. And he's kept going in that trajectory. Fanon just kind of does that. I don't know, like a great director or something. Yeah, the canvas is his. And it was, the next question is just the same question with Messiah Music. I have a metaphor. I have a Messiah Music metaphor.
Go ahead.
I tested this out on Blood Money because he's done some amazing stuff with Messiah Music. And my theory is, you remember the 7 seconds or less Suns, right?
Yeah.
The D'Antoni system is all 7 seconds or less offense, popping offense. But someone has to do the dirty work, right? Someone has to rebound. Someone has to defend, even though it's a bummer, right? That person in the D'Antoni system becomes like the least talked about, most important player on the team. And so I think of like Messiah Music as the Sean Marion of like underground hip hop production.
The Matrix.
Just like super important, super ill, never fails you, but he's never like in that conversation with like Derringer, Nicholas Craven. Like he's never like mentioned in that, but he's absolutely there. They're just not focused on the dirty work.
And he's in their conversations. Like Nicholas Craven has really put on for Messiah Music and for Fanon.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people, like as one is wont to do during a global pandemic, picked up a new hobby, which was making beats.
Right.
And a lot of what I did initially was just kind of looping, like finding loops and setting them up. And when I hear Messiah's joints, I'm like, oh, he does like, this is the Neanderthal stage, and he's at the superhuman stage of what I'm doing. And so I think it's just like, so my relationship with Messiah is a little bit different than my relationship with Fanon. I've really only gotten to know Fanon over the past year or so.
Right.
He's good people. Like I said, a brilliant producer.
Right.
But I haven't known him for as long. And Messiah, I initially reached out to him before Damn Near Grown even came out. So this is like 2013. I think it was hearing like Shark Fin Soup and Cloisters, and then being like, yo, this guy has made all of my favorite beats on the Arm & Hammer albums.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
And so, and then he'd gone back and made, like I went back and revisited some Quelle Chris stuff, and I was like, oh, my favorite beats from this album were also produced by Messiah Music. So I reached out at that point, like 2013, 2014, I was reaching out to people just to kind of see what it would look like in terms of like buying beats or whatever, because that's kind of what I had to do. And what I mainly what I wanted to do was I wanted to do good enough business to where people would want to continue working with me. And I wanted to make good enough music that people were willing to be like, all right, cool, I'm willing to work with you. So either I'm gonna discount this for you, or like, you know, we can work on something else. So really, this album with Messiah Music has come together over the past 7 years. And Messiah is like super easy to work with because he's always making beats.
Yeah.
So, you know, I might have had, you know, 8 or 9 joints from the album that were ready to go from the jump, but he let me swap out 4 or 5.
Right.
And then when it came down to working on the music, I went into that particular album with the idea that I was going to make kind of like the New York underground hip hop album, for lack of a better term, that I'd always wanted to make, or like the Chicago underground hip hop album I'd always wanted to make,
Yep.
where you're gonna have the concept joints and you're gonna have the introspective joints that approach specific things much more directly and make them kind of much more specific to my personal life. It's going to be well crafted, but it's also going to have hooks. So I'm not going to sacrifice songwriting for the bars.
Right.
And I think his beats, like, he's able to make anthems with 1 bar, 2 bar loops.
Right. Right.
Like, think about Vindaloo.
Oof.
Like, that's a hard ass beat. Think about Obama Incense. You know, like I just think about all of these joints that he's done.
I mean, the stuff on Rome. I mean, it's you know,
yeah, man. Wow.
I mean,
yep, Pakistani Brain.
Yeah. I mean, he's an incredible talent. And I think that mixture you're talking about, I don't know why it made me think of Cold Vein. It made me think of like that mixture of like there's concept songs, there's themes, right?
Wow.
Narratives, but there's also like reckless energy of just like rap and tear your head off, and like so this kind of mixture. That's that perfect underground album where, you know, we were talking about something like some of these albums that are super important to us, people haven't heard. They don't know, right? Like, and that's what's so cool about this underground thing. And your moment right now with Backwoods and everything else is there's a key misunderstanding with hip hop fans, right? This goes back years. That this is a meritocracy. Jay-Z's fault. Like the people on the top are on the top because they're better than the people that are below them. Period. Right? And you know that's not true because you know Sketch 185, you know Lamont, you know, on and on and on, right? And that's really kind of what Backwoods has been doing is being like, yeah, I know all these people from coming up with them, and I know they're amazing, and I'm gonna give the right people the right shots.
Yeah, and the conversations that I had with Woods about this album started 6 years ago. So, the fact that he was, I was fortunate enough that he was willing to really wait, because, part of the reason why it took so long was strategic. And then part of it was also just kind of like creatively being really stuck. And I won't reveal the actual title of the album, but the album originally was called The Institute of Living. And my dad is from West Hartford, Connecticut. And I remember he used to talk to me about, my father is a former journalist, so he just has all of this information in his head because he's consuming it all the time and is always kind of talking about really interesting things.
That's awesome.
And he mentioned this, you know, the Institute of Living. And I remember hearing that and being like, that would be a cold ass album title. And so
Yep.
I decided to run with that for a little bit. And then I wanted there to be, like, I've always wanted to make a concept album. The problem is always in the execution. So like, I wanted it to be a concept where it's like, how can I create this extended metaphor of America as its own kind of like mental health facility, and exploring all of these different ways that it plays out, but I could never really do it in a way where the music felt sincere.
Right.
So I kind of took it in a different direction, February of 2020. And then I knocked it all out. And then I sent it to Woods. And I was really, again, fortunate that he was still down to put it out. And, you know, he's really honored his commitment to me, which, you know, there are a lot of people who wouldn't have done the same thing, who would have moved on, who would have said, you're taking too long or whatever. And he would check in every now and then when I would hit him up just to kind of congratulate him on stuff, or to just check in.
Yeah.
Like, how's the album with Messiah coming? And, you know, it would be like 2016, I'd be like, it's 80% written. And then 2017, I would be like, it's like 50%. You know what I mean? So like,
she's hard.
it would all fluctuate, but you know, I was
when you have like, you have a picture, you have a map of what you want to do, but then you have to like change where the lens is a little bit, right? You have to like, you know, maybe the focus shouldn't be here and it should be here, right? And then you've got to adjust everything to accommodate that, and see if it works. It's a really hard thing to do, but it can be very rewarding.
Yeah, and I think that's the album that people are going to get, because I'm very rewarded by it. I mean, the fact that these songs have lasted this long proves that they're worth believing in my opinion.
Yeah.
And you know, Backwoods, I'm very grateful that Backwoods feels the same way. And I'm really, really looking forward to what the reaction is going to be from people in August or September when we drop it.
And so, and this kind of leads naturally to the next question, which is, you have, since your stuff is very personal, it's very thoughtful, but also like blades and all that stuff, to quote Castro. So the time frame on making this, as you said, 6 years sometimes, you know, depending on what you want to do, this is an era where people are cranking stuff out, right? And so have you found the right work rate for you, and how did you find it?
I think during the pandemic, I found it just in terms of like, oh, okay, I have time to record now. Because I live in Oak Park, but I work in a suburb that's 2 hours away on public transit. And and so I work 40 hours a week and commute 20 hours. So I really didn't have the time or the creative energy to really get back into it. And I have a home recording setup, but I wasn't using it. Unless people needed guest verses or something like that. So, and also the things that I would record, like I learned to compress my vocals so that I would have listenable drafts to know, like, you know, if I needed to take passes at different things. And really, there's like a handful of projects that I've been spending a very long time putting together. So my work rate really is just kind of like, I'm just going to keep cranking out stuff and writing, and then finding homes for these songs or homes for these bars or whatever. And then I'm also just kind of constantly going to listen to music that I like. I'm not going to try as hard as I would to kind of like think about what's in the zeitgeist that I can take from. I'm not going to spend as much time on social media trying to learn the music business or trying to learn how to wind up in the music business or whatever. I'm just going to be a lot more logical about, I'm not going to work harder, I'm going to work smarter.
Right.
So my work rate is pretty much just like I have a Google Doc of bars and I add things to that. And then as I get beats from people, either who want guest verses or, you know, for projects that I'm working on, I try to find places to start in that Google Doc and I just kind of write from there. And, you know, it's worked for me. And I try not to be too precious about my writing process. I think I tried to do that too many times. I was like, you know, okay, I need to have done this, this, and this in order to sit down and write a really good verse. And then when you do this, this, and this, and you sit down and nothing's coming to you, then you're like, oh, this must not be my writing process then. So I'm going to try this, and then I'm going to try this. And so the thing that I've learned is I really have no writing process, you know,
Right.
and there are a bunch of different ways to spark thought and come up with something really dope. So yeah, I mean, long story short, you know, working smarter and not harder is definitely been helpful for me as
Huge.
far as how I spend my time and my work rate.
It's and being able to kind of practicalize your mission statement, right? And like
Yeah.
what you're trying to do. Uh, people would people kept coming up to me and asking me like, "Oh, you're a writer. Like, what do you write for? What drives your weird kind of
Mm,
questions?" And I just kept shrugging and saying, "I don't feel well if I don't write. That's it.
mm,
My
yeah.
brain, there's too much in there, and so I write. I get it out. You know, like it's if I go without writing for a long period of time, the energy is weird. It's fidgety, right? It's wrong.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's keeping it that simple helped me, right? Like that I
Mhm.
wasn't. I don't. I'm not. I'm not. I'm no longer telling everyone that I want to be on the shelf next to like Hemingway or whatever font. You know, like I'm just gonna do this because I love it. That's it. Uh, it's a different thing. Uh, and it was interesting reading the These Days Mag interview where you're talking about Zilla and the conversation you had with him about getting a day job uh, and transitioning and scheduling your time. Uh, it's 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 it, what was the anxiety of seeing the scene blow up,
Mm.
other people blow up. Uh, talk about that, how that was emotionally. Like it's such a strange experience.
Oh man, resentment. I mean, that's something that if you don't cut it out, it turns into a cancer of sorts, and
Mhm.
it'll eat so much of your blessings. It'll eat or so many of your blessings. It'll eat so much of your creativity and your positivity and your energy. And I think that I felt, and it is kind of like a white dude thing, and it's also kind of like an artist thing as well. I felt entitled to success that I hadn't worked for.
Mm.
So like I would be out here making what I thought were really dope rap songs or albums or whatever. And I would be in the cut like writing and I'd be like, oh, this is nobody has ever flipped this simile or flipped this image or
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
cliche into something original or whatever. And why aren't people talking about this? And they're talking about all these people um, because their music's more palatable, when really it was more so just like, nah, these people are really good at what they do and they don't stop working.
Right.
So somebody like for example, the reason why Saba and Pivot um, are where they are now is because they were in that basement grinding it out every day for like 4 years,
Yeah.
every single day. They were in that basement making music. Sab was cranking out beats and they were crushing it. And that they worked making that music every day. And if you're not prepared to work that hard, or if you're not working that hard or that smart rather,
Right.
then you don't really have the right to be resentful of their success, regardless of, you know, if they started in one place and then lapped you. And that was the thing that I had to sit with, was like, at the end of the day, people are rewarded for hard work and they're rewarded for their talent. So I can't be mad at people, or like, you know, friends of mine who I came up with in the youth spoken word scene,
Right.
who are incredibly well-established poets. And I just had to kind of kill the voice in my head that was saying, well, what you do is as good or better, because A, nah, it wasn't. Like, just like, you know, I could be the greatest rapper in the world. It doesn't necessarily mean that I make the best music in the world. And B, I just kind of had to learn to find ways to continue to get better and to never stop wanting to get better, and to never think that the work of improving is done. And I think that kind of helped center me. And then also, like, the minute that you stop considering that you have to make money from art is the minute that a lot of that stress and a lot of that anxiety is alleviated. And then you just get to focus on the craft of what you're doing. And suddenly, you know, things fall into place a lot easier.
Yeah, no, it was that's incredible. I mean, it's an incredible thing to go through and to understand that, like, there's a level of focus that's different, right? That it's not all raw page to page talent. It's focus as well, right? Focus and determination. And it's one of the things that always made me uneasy about the poetry scene, was just that people would come in there, feel welcome, and then they're writing to impress the poetry scene. They want either the audience's approval or they want the approval of the other poets. But they're not writing with their personal goals in mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Especially when you go into a slam.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like, you have to not care that you got a 5.6.
right.
If you did everything that you came there to do, that 5.6 doesn't matter.
Right.
So
no, it's you and I felt, because I was a short story writer. That's kind of my deal. I jumped into this open mic scene because I felt like sometimes short stories can get boring, and if I made myself do it on stage, I would be able to prove that, like, I write stuff that's interesting enough to live on the stage as well, you know? So I was trying to grow that way. So I was never like a slam guy. But I was always like, no, writing should be a thing you do in a dark room by yourself, like, for the goals you have in mind. You shouldn't do it to impress so-and-so or so-and-so, or, and, you know, so I just, sometimes that community could become a toxic part of the creative process.
yeah, and when I did a mixtape as God intended, I also changed my goals so that it was like, okay, cool, I'm just gonna try to get 5 new fans. My goal is not X amount of downloads, X amount of dollars. My goal is 5 new fans. If I can win 5 new fans, I've done my job. And then that kind of approach and that kind of refocusing has made this music shit so much easier. And I know that if you're a short story writer, I know that I know that you understand this feeling as well, because it's freeing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the page is a beautiful thing. It's just fantastic. There's some writers who were talking about how intimidating the blank page is, and I'm always like, I don't know, man. I love the blank page. I can do whatever, you know. When I was in the Army, I'd be drunk with my friends, and I'd be like, let's pull up a Word document and just make up some shit and go back and forth. You know, and I'm drunk, just starting a short story that starts in the labyrinth with the Minotaur chasing you or whatever the fuck. It's like, why not? See if it works, you know? Because your experiments can lead to other cool shit later down the line.
Absolutely. And if it doesn't work right now, it could work. Like you said, if it doesn't work right now, it could work later. It's like when you were talking about revisiting those short stories of yours, you know, it's one of those things where it's like maybe one of the characters in the short stories, maybe the reason the short story doesn't work is because it's a short story and not a novel.
Right.
So yeah.
I had a class that was like a long form. It was like a I don't know. It was like creative writing minor, and I talked to the teacher, and it was like an independent study class. I said, look, I can write a new story. I write stories constantly, but I've got this one story that's stuck in my side. Right? It's too short to be a novella. It's too long to be a short story. It doesn't make sense the way it is, but I love it for some reason. Can you help me with it? Right? And that amazing teacher, and he was like, well, the main character is a jerk. And the interesting character is the other character.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? The main character is like me when I was in my 20s. Well, you were a jerk. And so I had to change the lens. I had to be like, oh shit, I have to grow this relationship. Like that character has to change this character, you know? But there was, you know, I had to be able to look at it fresh and be like, man, so that's the problem here.
Yeah, facts. And you know, the other thing too is just sometimes it's, and the thing that I've learned, and I know I said it earlier in the interview, but I'll say it again, it's like you got to find ways to lean into some things that you may not have necessarily wanted to do before, because that's where the rewards are. And you know, a lot of times it means that you're leaning away from whatever box you've kind of put yourself in and into one that might better fit you.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely hear that, and it's an accurate parallel for sure.
And to clarify, the slam community is a beautiful thing and a supportive thing. And community in general in art is a very special and important thing.
Yeah, but you know, you have those people who are just there for the numbers, or you have those people who are just there for the accolades, or the people who are just there for the attention, and they wash out after a while. And then it's like the people who are there for the community tend to be the people who stick around the longest.
And you know this from teaching workshops and working with people as you do. There are some people who teach you to be them. Right? They will lock in with you and be like, do this, do that. But you know, and they're teaching you to be them, right? And the really special people can teach you to be better you. And that's a different level. You know.
And Woods actually said something that kind of shifted. It's crazy that you say that, because Woods said something that shifted my whole teaching style once. He came in to a workshop I was teaching. It was him, Premrock, Mo Nichols, and Woods said something to the effect of like, everybody has a different talent. Some people may have a pocket knife. Some people may have this crazy broadsword. It's all about how sharp you keep the blade. And at that point, I was like, oh, so I don't have to teach. If there's a kid who wants to make music like Kid Cudi or something in that lane, even if I don't naturally gravitate toward it, I can find ways to be able to help that kid get to where he wants to be, or she or they want to be, instead of just trying to focus on molding them into my opinion of what makes a great musician or a great rapper.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I definitely feel that, and that resonates with me. But I cut you off. What were you gonna say?
No, I think that's it's a really special thing. And I think it's one of the things to build on your Woods thing is I started hanging around musicians. I've never made music. I can't carry a beat or a rhythm. But we started talking about the process, making an album, you know, track sequencing, cohesion. And we were just, and I knew their pain because I've written books, right? I've written plays, I've written all kinds of things, and some of them suck, right? Like, so I know exactly the stress of it and how gratifying it can be and how hard it is to manage the parts. in this kind of vague, we all do this together thing, right? And so there's a universality to the struggle, the creative struggle to create in some ways. So feeling vested in that has helped me just be open-minded and see what people are trying to do and applaud them when they succeed.
Yeah.
You
True
know?
indeed.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I started Free Music Empire, is because I felt like the critics weren't like coming in with a good heart trying to like understand the work. That a lot
Yeah.
of them were just, this doesn't fit in the zeitgeist, or this isn't good, or it is good. And you're like, no, there's a lot of gray area here. There's really bad albums that turn into really great albums next time. It's
Yeah.
just, life is weird.
Yeah, and music journalism is a tough game too. So I get it. Like you want to be able to pay your rent, feed yourself with something you love. So I certainly can't fault anybody for that, but kudos to you for really trying to, wade in that gray area, that ever disintegrating gray area.
Do you ever notice that like movie critics hate comedies? All of them?
Yep.
They just hate all comedies because they do this all day. All day. And so then now they have to go and they have to see this guy play with his butt cheeks, and they're like, I hate this,
Yeah. And then some of the comedies that they love, like there's some critically acclaimed comedies that, they don't age well.
No, they're not important, not good. And like, so when you're just beating yourself up with it, it can be rough. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about that I thought I don't know why, but I think this is a topic for you and maybe not other people. The homophobic lyrics in hip hop, right? There's still a lot of them. And I've talked to people who are like, zero tolerance. Like, if you say these words, you're done. I don't fuck with you. And I understand that perspective. I am trying to have a little bit of a more holistic perspective, a little bit more three-dimensional perspective, because I feel like I've known people, the hate is in their language, but not in their heart. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
There's regional ways of speaking that they haven't shaken out of them yet. Places you grew up in, environments you've been around. And as we say with privilege, right? You may be sitting there saying, how dare you say these things, when you're just from a place where you've had access that other people haven't had to, perfect your linguistic phrases, right? So, I mean, how do you, I know how you handle it personally, right? You've already said you try and be as good and understanding as you can. What are your expectations of other people's art and your tolerance of other people's proclivities in this area?
I mean, I think I've consumed plenty of art in a variety of media that has been problematic in one way or another. Some of it is, art I hold in really high regard. I think it's something that we do just in general as consumers of culture.
Yep.
I'll just kind of speak to my own philosophy on it in my music and in my workshop spaces. So I view kind of music in facilitating workshops in the same way, which is I want everybody to come in and feel welcome at the party. I don't want anyone to come to the table and feel like they can't sit down and eat with us.
Right.
And the person who looks uncomfortable, I'm going to do what I can to try to explore that. But I'm going to make sure that everybody that's sitting at this table understands that they're not going to make anybody else who's sitting here with them feel like shit. So in my, there's a lot of, I've tried to, I don't use that language in my music.
Sure.
I don't allow for that language to be used. I don't allow for that language to be used in the workshop spaces that I facilitate. And And if those rules are broken, it leads to a follow-up conversation with that person where I'm able to kind of get to a place where it's like, I can't control what anybody does outside of my workshops, and I can't control what anybody says or does in their work. I can only really control what I do in terms of how I create and in terms of the spaces that I am an authority figure in. So, and in those spaces, I want everybody to feel welcome. I want everybody to feel safe. And if there are people who are made to feel unsafe, then that's a problem, and I need to correct that immediately. So that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah. No, I think the thing, and that's a perfectly reasonable way to go about it. The thing I think people don't know is that we're not necessarily censoring you or saying, like, you're saying that and it's making these other people feel bad. That's a part of it. But the other part is that stuff is toxic within you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you let go of that and you live a life without the need for that, it's a better life.
Mm-hmm.
All day.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. You're walking around and you're not as offended by, somebody else who is just being themselves,
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that I think that hip hop still has to work on it. I think that it's something that isn't unique to hip hop. I think it's reflective of American culture at large. And,
Sure. 100%.
but I also think that hip hop is probably, while it's still shaking those issues loose, is in a much more accepting place than it was like 20, 30 years ago. Or even 5 or 10 years ago. So, like, there are still people who are problematic. There are still people who are toxic. There are people who are, corrected in very kind and patient ways, who just outright reject the criticism. And when we're thinking about social media and how outrage moves the needle and how mentions are essentially currency at this point, I think we got to start figuring out how to best handle those situations that arise in front of us and within us, because at this point, we're not well conditioned as human beings to accept that criticism from others as a whole.
Totally.
So you want to be able to have that conversation that you're talking about in a way where people are not feeling like when you are an authority figure, you don't necessarily always want to call people out. You want to call them in.
Yes.
And then you want to make them understand why these rules are in place and why they should be followed and why, and then hopefully you get to a space one day where you're able to sit down and have conversations with those people, and then they're able to more easily kind of understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. I mean, you're like, here's how we win, and here's how we all win together, right? And we can't all win together like that, and that's a big part of it. And this in America, we set up this kind of crossfire debate, right, where we yell at each other, and I kind of want to support people out of that behavior, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I want to be able to just be like, because I know, and I never used homophobic slurs, as being the only Jewish person I knew that was probably not a good thing to do for others.
right.
But there was loose affiliated language, that was just part of the way people talked in Maine. And being in the poetry scene and being around gay, lesbian, trans teenagers growing into their identity, and how hard it was to grow into your identity, it was a serious impression on me, and it changed how I spoke, because I cared more about what I was saying, and I just want that for them, right? I want that for like the gritty post Griselda rappers who are impressing a hardcore audience. I want that for everybody. But it's not that I want to, you know, point the finger at them and put them below me. I want them with me, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that like but even if you want to bring Griselda up as a point, right? Like I haven't heard a lot of, and it could be selective listening on my part, but I haven't heard as much of that kind of language in their music as I would have heard in similar music that was coming out, you know, when I was a teenager. So, you know, I think, and even some of the people who were using a lot of that language when I was a teenager and I was listening to a lot of underground and indie rap, they don't really use it as often as they used to, or they don't use it at all anymore. And they've fully acknowledged where they were wrong and they've changed.
Absolutely.
So I think that and I definitely think when we're talking about language, there has to be room for growth. I think when we're talking about violence or like inciting violence, I don't think there's any room for nuance at this point. Like I think kind of stakes are high, and you know, we have to be really selective about which situations we grant nuance to. And if it's a situation where we feel like it can be a safe learning opportunity for the person who's offended whoever is in the room, then, you know, we can do that. But if we're talking about you physically attack somebody in the room, or you've gone after somebody, like you know, verbally been violent toward them or threatened them or made them, like at that point, you don't get to be in the room anymore and you don't get to come back.
Yeah. No, that's a fine distinction for it. I would, you know, my tip would be your favorite rapper raps a lot of words, says a lot of things, right? So you're 6 albums deep. You've heard a lot of words from this individual. So if they drop these phrases, you should hopefully be able to tell contextually, is this hate in their heart or is this a bad joke? What is the context this exists within, right? Like you said, if it's like Rock Marciano's had some homophobic jokes before. It's happened. But I've watched 1,000 interviews. I've heard 1,000 verses. I don't think there's hate in that dude's heart. I think he likes to play with language and have everything available.
And his manager said that they actually had a conversation with him about it. I saw Jazz said something on Twitter about, yeah, we've had conversations with Rock about that. And so he's been more conscientious about that in his music, I'm sure, because there is a cross section of fans of his, like people who really want to rock with what it is he does, but the language is a turnoff for them. And so, you know, regardless of whatever the motivations for those conversations were, it's still important that they happened, and it's important that people were aware that they happened, so that, you know, there's room for growth. You know, it doesn't matter how old you are, you're never too old to learn something new and become a better person.
And I fully believe wholeheartedly that hip hop is the best space for free speech in America right now. That there's things being talked about in hip hop that just aren't talked about anywhere else. They're swept under the rug everywhere else. And it's necessary. It's all very necessary. But everybody has a responsibility. The fans have a responsibility to not just intelligently critique who they support, but intelligently support who they really should support. Right?
Yeah.
There's plenty of good music out there, and don't support stuff if you don't like it. Right?
Fact. Yeah.
Album by someone you think who sucks because you think it'll be funny that they suck. Like,
right.
spend that time listening to someone else.
Right.
You know, I used to do that at work. People would be like, "Oh, did you hear so and so's new album? It's terrible." I'm like, "Dude, Devin the Dude has a new album and it's incredible. Just listen to that. Like,
yeah,
just go there. Put your time and money where it's effective. You know, yeah. So I'll definitely check out some Scenic Deluxe merch. It's good stuff.
Thank you.
I like having shirts on. People ask me who it is, and boom, there it is. You know, give them something.
Thank you.
But yeah, no, I'm very happy for you and for your career,
Thank
uh,
you.
and honestly for the way you've handled being white in these spaces, right? For the way you've handled uh, supporting fellow artists, right? There's some people who are intimidated by the fact that they're white in a black space and want to, you know, want to give adequate room for everyone else to shine. Um, but everybody needs support.
Mhm.
So you were saying, like back in the day, you know, hip hop was just not as accepted. Being into hip hop was not accepted, and you had to plant your flag. I believe in this shit, you know, and you've planted your flag uh, in a way that I appreciate.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate you. I appreciate you offering your time and your resources to me. I really appreciated the 1,000 points of sound.
Yep.
That meant a lot to me. That was,
Mhm.
you know, I put a lot of time and effort into what I do, and you know, I don't always know if people get it, and so to know that somebody got it was really touching. And you know, as far as being a white person in a black space, I think um, there's always more for me to learn,
Yep.
and there's always room for me to grow. And anything I can do to, you know, subvert my privilege um, for someone else's benefit, I want to do that.
Yep. Yeah. No. There and that's that's just an incredibly important lesson to always be growing and to appreciate your growth and remember uh, where you were before it, right? And part of the beautiful thing about Damn Near Grown and the appreciation of hip hop within it is that it's you clearly saying that existing within these black spaces helped me be more myself. This this culture wanted me to be me, wanted me to be the best me I could be, and helped me grow within that. And that's exactly how I felt. So yeah, it's great.
Word. Thank you very much for having me on, man.
I
I
appreciate it.
appreciate you. And in the spirit of that,
Mhm.
you should hit my man Nick Arcade and have a conversation with him, because
I'm into it.
he's an incredible producer.
Mhm.
He's been out here doing this thing for quite some time, and I want as many people as possible to work with this man. And he definitely needs a much larger audience, and he needs people to know what he's capable of. So
I would, yeah, I will
I'll
definitely reach
send you
out.
his info. I'll send you his info.
Absolutely. I will do that, man. I
All right.
appreciate the time. I've got one question for you after
Yes,
we're
sir.
done. Chicago question.
Okay.
But thank you all for listening. I may cut this up into parts. I appreciate it. Thank you for following Free Music Empire. Uh, and, Neil Long, thank you for everything you've done.